you all tonight that Alice in Wonderland is perhaps the best tangible representation of the abilities of polymaths. It combines imaginative storytelling, literary devices, and logical and mathematical puzzles. Two great polymaths connected with this work are Lewis Carroll and Raymond Smullyan. In The Adventures of Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, Carroll uses math to enhance scenarios that a young girl experiences in dreams, whereas Smullyan uses literary narration to bring math and logic puzzles to life in his work, Alice in Puzzle Land.
Everyone here is probably familiar with Lewis Carroll, author of the beloved Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and sequel Through the Looking Glass. But we may not be aware that in addition to being a celebrated author, Carroll was also a mathematician, logician, photographer, and a deacon. Lewis Carroll was born on January 27, 1832 in Daresbury, Cheshire. He was one of 11 children in his family, and he was the oldest son. Carroll's family lived in a rural environment, keeping livestock and even growing some of their own food. He did not attend any formal educational institution until he was 12 years old, though his father, a Christ Church graduate, taught Carroll in their home before he attended a formal school, and like his father, Carroll took great interest in mathematics even in early childhood. Carroll would later study mathematics at Christ Church in Oxford, just as his father did. We may know this man as Lewis Carroll, and he's most often referred to by this name, but this is actually a pseudonym. His real name was Charles Lutwidge Dodson. His pen name, Lewis Carroll, comes from his two first names, Charles and Lutwidge, which he translated into Latin as Carolus Lodovicus. He then reversed the order of them, translated them back, creating the pen name Lewis Carroll. He wouldn't adopt this name until he was about 24 years old, which is also around the same time that he took up photography. So now we'll move on to what is likely considered Lewis Carroll's crowning work, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Originally, this story was told to amuse the little family daughters, Alice, Edith, and Lorena, as they rode up the Isis, part of the River Thames. Alice especially enjoyed the story and eventually convinced Carroll to write it down for her. 3 years after this event, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland was published. This story demonstrates the creative mind through Lewis Carroll through its mathematical attributes. One way he incorporates math into this novel is through logic puzzles. Logic is considered to be one of the most basic concepts in math, and Alice's Adventures in Wonderland is awash with it. An excellent example of this is in the chapter A Mad Tea Party. Alice states that "I mean what I say" has the same meaning as "I say what I mean." But when you really consider these statements, you can see that they're very different. The Hatter replies to Alice, "Well, you might as well just say 'I see what I eat' is the same thing as 'I eat what I see.'" In this case, the Hatter is right. Carroll is demonstrating here that the converse of a preposition is not always the same as the preposition. Another instance of basic math in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland occurs in this same chapter. While at the tea party, the Hatter instructs Alice to take more tea, to which Alice replies that she cannot take more tea because she has not had any yet. To this, the Hatter states that it is difficult to take less from nothing, but simple to take more from nothing. In other words, addition is more easily done than subtraction, especially in the case of subtracting from 0, because then you have to deal with negative numbers. And negative numbers weren't even considered acceptable solutions to mathematical problems until fairly recently in history. Carroll also demonstrates algebra in Chapter 9 of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland through a conversation between Alice, the Mock Turtle, and the Griffin. In their conversation, the Mock Turtle describes the lessons he was taught in school to Alice, and she reacts to his comments with several questions. When Alice inquires about the length of his lessons, the Mock Turtle replies with 10 hours the first day, 9 the next, and so on. Alice finds this to be very strange, but almost as if to deride her for not knowing, the Griffin remarks, "That is why they are called lessons, because they lessen from day to day." This double entendre for the word lesson is also an excellent example of Carroll's enthusiasm for wordplay. In fact, Carroll seemed to be just as entertained by words as he was with numbers. He experimented with how he could rearrange and manipulate words and letters, much like you would with numbers. Carroll developed several types of ciphers in his lifetime, including key-vowel, matrix, alphabet, and telegraph types. Carroll also experimented with words in other ways as well. One particular exercise he seemed to enjoy was creating syllogisms. A syllogism usually consists of two premises or statements from which we can draw a conclusion. Here's an example of a simple syllogism that actually comes from Aristotle. All men are mortal, all Greeks are men. From this, we can easily say that Greeks are mortal. Carroll provides us with much more entertaining examples, such as, no fossil can be crossed in love, an oyster may be crossed in love. From this, we can deduce that oysters are not fossils. Here's another example of Carroll's syllogisms that's also very amusing. No bald creature needs a hairbrush, no lizards have hair, therefore no lizard needs a hairbrush. This is only a small sample of Carroll's syllogisms, and they get much more complicated, adding more and more premises. Carroll even implemented bilateral diagrams to help solve more complicated syllogisms, creating an interesting blend of language and mathematics. Before moving on to the next slide, I thought it might be of interest to point out that this illustration here is from the initial publication of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. This illustration is one of many that were drawn for this book by a man named John Tenniel. On the original manuscript, however, Carroll included his own illustrations, so he was somewhat of an artist himself. Carroll also enjoyed acrostics, such as the one I have here. This is an acrostic found at the end of Through the Looking Glass. It spells out Alice's full name, Alice Pleasance Little, the full name of Carroll's young friend. He denied that Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland sequence was about her, even though he slipped this acrostic of her name directly into them. In addition to his other interests, Carroll was also involved in photography. In his lifetime, Carroll took around 3,000 photographs, most of which were portraits. Carroll was actually one of the first photographers to consider it an art form, and he was also among the first to pose his subjects and give them costumes and props. He had the opportunity to photograph famous people such as Alfred Tennyson, Michael Faraday, John Millais, John Ruskin, and Dante Gabriel Rossetti. Displayed here is a photo of Alice Little dressed as a beggar maid, and this photo was taken by Carroll himself. This is probably one of the most controversial pictures he took, especially of Alice. However, this photo is a great example of Carroll's sensitivity and attention to the subject. This photo wasn't just a means of keeping record, which was previously the purpose of photography. It's a piece of art. Unfortunately for us, Carroll suddenly quit his hobby of photography in the year 1880, and only around 1,000 of the 3,000 pictures he took still survive today. We still have Lewis Carroll's literary works, however, and they continue to thrive in popularity. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland is especially influential on mathematicians and writers today, even though it was published nearly 150 years ago. And it's sometimes very difficult to find connections between disciplines, especially disciplines that are so different, such as English and math, and that's what I find so interesting about Lewis Carroll. He thought seamlessly between disciplines, using one to enhance another. And I believe that this is what the true essence of being a polymath is, not only being knowledgeable in many disciplines, but be able to make connections between them.
And one such person who was inspired by Carroll's ability to blend math and literature is best-selling author and mathematician Raymond Smullyan. Smullyan was born in New York in 1919 and has worked in many different fields throughout his life. His first passion was music. Smullyan performed as a concert pianist throughout his adolescent years and went on to teach piano at Roosevelt College in Chicago. Unfortunately, this career was short-lived due to tendinitis in his right arm. From there, Smullyan studied math and logic, received his PhD in math from Princeton in 1959, and eventually he was able to teach mathematical logic at both Princeton and Dartmouth. His interests have also extended into professional magic, not to mention his philosophical writings on Chinese Taoism. Some of Smullyan's mathematical works include the theory of formal systems and first-order logic. In 1978, Smollyan had published his first book of riddles, What is the Name of This Book?, which consisted of knights and knaves riddles based on Count Dracula. Smollyan continued to demonstrate his abilities to combine literary narration with math and logic in books like The Chess Mysteries of Sherlock Holmes, The Lady or the Tiger, To Mock a Mockingbird, and of course in 1982, Allison Puzzle. Smollyan was intrigued by how Carroll had incorporated math and logic into his stories about Wonderland. It was very rare in both Smolyan's and Carroll's time for math and literature to be combined, especially in such a way as Carroll had blended them. Rather than simply analyze the math in Alice in Wonderland, Smollyan used this story as the basis for a series of his own related puzzles, which would then be combined into Alice in Puzzleland. Basing puzzles off of Carroll's Wonderland was ingenious, in that Carroll had already established a world filled with logical riddles and mathematical quirks. Smollyan simply expanded upon Carroll's characters and setting in order to create a scenario of young Alice solving problems to get through Wonderland and return home. The full title, Alice in Puzzleland, A Carolinian Tale for Children Under 80, exemplifies how the riddles are geared toward an informal audience, one that is seeking fun rather than enlightenment. In contrast to Alice in Wonderland, which utilized logical brain teasers in order to add interest to a story, Smolyan's Puzzleland is so riddled with mathematics and logic that Smollyan employs literary techniques in order to increase the accessibility to the reader. Some of these techniques include diction, point of view, irony, and narration through the use of characters. In order to get a better idea of how Smollyan uses storytelling to enhance logic riddles, let's take a look at a couple of puzzles. First, puzzle 52. Do you know how to divide? Asked the Red Queen. Why, of course, replied Alice. Very well, then. Suppose you divide 11,1111 by 3. What remainder do you get? You may use pencil and paper if you like. Alice set to work and made a calculation. I get a remainder of 2, replied Alice. Wrong, exclaimed the Red Queen triumphantly. You see, she can't do division. Not a bit, agreed the White Queen. But the problem with this is you have to try writing the number as a sum of 11,000 plus 1,100 plus 11, which equals 12,111. And when we divide that number by 3, the remainder, of course, is 0. Smolyan's repetition or alliteration of the 11s was undoubtedly the cause of Alice's and perhaps some of the audience members' confusion. Okay. And for another puzzle, I have number 54. She can't do division one bit, repeated the Red Queen. Shall I try her on addition and subtraction? Absolutely, replied the White Queen. All right, said the Red Queen. A bottle of wine costs 30 shillings. The wine costs 26 shillings more than the bottle. How many shillings is the bottle worth? Alice got this one right. Can you? Okay. If you got an answer of 4, you probably set up an equation like 30 equals 26 plus the cost of the bottle, or 26 plus x. However, that would be incorrect. Since the wine costs 26 shillings more than the cost of the bottle, you have to have 26 plus the cost of the bottle plus the cost of the bottle. So it would be 26 plus x equals 30. Smolyan's diction provided the obstacle in this puzzle because of the confusion over the implications of the word more. Also, he initially writes this puzzle in third person, revealing only what the characters are thinking and doing. However, after laying out the third puzzle, he writes in first person and directly addresses the reader, which establishes an element of audience interaction with the story. These are just a couple of puzzles found in Smolyan's book. If you appreciate the characters and story of Alice in Wonderland and enjoy solving brain teasers, I would strongly recommend reading Smolyan's Alice in Puzzleland.
So, based on Carroll's mathematical background, his innovations in photography, and his literary masterpiece, I believe it is safe to say Carroll has earned the right to be called a polymath. Likewise, Smolyan's music career, philosophical works, contributions to math, and success in literature earned Smolyan the title Polymath as well. By weaving various math concepts into amusing plot lines with wacky characters, these two mathematicians were both able to achieve something that is sometimes very difficult, making math fun. Thank you.